growing up in Taiwan as an American citizen, saw firsthand how vital the American military, armed forces, and veterans are to the prosperity of the country. And yes, there's colonialism and imperialism, and that's why they're there. But without them, the prosperity of Taiwan and Japan and the stability of that region would not be in place today. But I just love and welcome the opportunity to talk to both Tony and Tom, and really excited to kick off the Asian Hall of Fame forum with two distinguished speakers. So let's start with Tony, Major General Tony Taguba. And I know that our viewers would love to hear more about your family, your background. We've read about it, we've known about it, we've heard about the Taguba report, which is fantastic and amazing. But what are the life experiences that shaped your path, your journey, and continue to inspire your career and your work today?
Want me to start, huh? Okay. Well, my path to American citizenship came when my family immigrated to Hawaii. Then was a state in 1959, courtesy of my dad. My mom and three of my siblings arrived in Hawaii. That's as far as we went because my mom did not want to go all the way to Germany where my dad was serving at the time. So he came to meet us. And when I said courtesy of the United States Army, my dad fought during World War II under the US Army. He was a Philippine scout. He was a Philippine national at the time. And part of his reward after fighting, he was one of about 3,000 that was awarded US citizenship. He told me that when I asked him, how did you do that? He says, well, it wasn't automatic. They had to take a test. So he said he failed it twice. And I said, how can you fail a citizenship test? He says, because the darn thing was in English and he didn't speak English. So he had a tutor and he passed it the third time, and there he goes. And we became American citizens on July 3rd, 1962, a year later. And had aspirations to be in the Army because he inspired me. And I just liked the idea of studying military history. But, and took ROTC, I was not good enough to go to West Point, academically. But I thought I was prepared taking ROTC to be an Army officer as a person of color. Little did I know that I was woefully unprepared because then we're still, it was in an integrated Army where it was still reeling from the segregation way back when. I would find myself as the only Asian of Filipino descent. I was with a group of West Point graduates when I started my training. They were not paying attention to me, nor was I, I was literally intimidated because I was asked if I was a foreign exchange officer or what country was I from, or was I Native American, that type of thing. So it was a matter of how do I articulate that as a brand new officer in the US Army. And my first assignment, a lot of the troops in California was from Vietnam. They are not from Vietnam, but served in Vietnam, and underneath their breath that they would say that I look like a Viet Cong, North Vietnamese, and called slope, slant eye, you name it. But it was not an acceptable behavior, but it was a tolerated behavior. And when I became a captain, it was a struggle. English is my second language. I had to perfect that all the time and always questioned. I'd look around and there's nobody else like me. But it's one of those things that you continue to serve. I asked a mentor of mine, my commander, a lieutenant colonel. By that time, I was 34 years old, and my commander was 32 years old. A lieutenant colonel, and I was still a captain. I said, how did that happen, right? But okay, it happens. And I asked him, what can I do to better myself? And how can I improve? So the mentoring piece and a little bit of the tormenting piece actually worked, because you don't want to hear the right answer all the time. Sometimes you want to hear the bad answer, a not so comfortable answer. But I didn't think that I would make it all the way to 2 stars. It wasn't that automatic. Mostly people of color, just like with Tom. Actually, there's an additional step, you might say, of proving yourself. that you're going to have to answer those questions of who are you, what are your aspirations, and even if you share that with them, that doesn't mean that they're going to help you. Help is not like preferential treatment. Help is basically saying, this is what you need to do, and don't do it. If you're making mistakes, don't do it again. Study, 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 right? And as an old adage mentor once said, that if you get dismissed or you get discounted or people are slurring you for whatever names and whatever have you, well, that just don't, you're going to get mad. But my mentor used to say, don't get mad. Don't get even, get ahead, get around them, you know, because I'm not the John Wayne type, you might say, just a proverbial thought. I'm 5'6", so we 150 pounds. I'm not your typical officer of, you know, white American, but I can speak English and I can compete as much as you can. And so educated myself and you know, and went ahead, married a white woman, a white American, blonde, blue-eyed, that whole thing. And she used to say that, well, you're going to get ahead because you're married up, right? Okay, I get it. I mean, so I say, is that a racial innuendo in there somewhere? But it wasn't that way. I mean, she wasn't used to being in the U.S. Army. But I pledged that if I got to the point of where I could have a little bit of power, a little bit of influence, that I need to bring people up to help them to be more vocal, because I wasn't vocal enough. And what are they going to do to me as long as I do things legally, legitimately, within the bounds of humanity? And sometimes growing up in the Army as Tom, I'm the Marines with Tom, it's a very regimented, regulated, rigid organization that's sometimes they forget that they are people of color in the ranks. Sometimes commanders do that, but you know, for us, it's not as much as a struggle. It's trying to maintain our presence as Asian Americans or African Americans, that we are relevant to serve in our country. We want to serve in our country. We do it willingly. And for those who make the rank, from colonel all the way up to general, is that our responsibility, and Tom was shared with this, is to bring people up, guide them so they can serve and be leaders. Like your daughter, if she wants to be in the Army, we can help her, you know, because if they're not prepared to do that, to wear a uniform and to be a leader, not a manager, to be a leader of men and women, then you have to prepare and be prepared and be mentored in order to do that, because we don't do this to do that for people to fail. Failure is never an option, as one would say. We prepare them so they can be leaders of our society. So I took
Well, I
about
love
30
that.
minutes of that. So.
No, that's what I was saying, that this is, whenever I talk to you, Tony, I'm just so
Yeah.
inspired. And it just gets me very excited about making a difference. And I think, Tom, we talk about also the Marine Corps and how it's regimented and how we want to set people up for success. Now, what are the things that has happened in your life and in your experiences in your career that inspires your work today as a mentor and as a consultant?
Well, first, thank you, Maki, and first, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for putting on, you know, on the panel with General Taguba, who's a hero of mine. He's become a mentor of mine too since we started working together about 2 years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
But he's very different from me, which is what I love about him, because he takes the anger and frustration. He's got a lot of grace, and he turns it into positive energy. I have not been able to do that, and I'm very angry all the time, especially after the Buffalo shootings, right? And the shootings, even the shootings of Asian violence based on politics, you know, with the Chinese mainlander shooting Taiwanese church. So all that angers me, right? And I get angry because no one else is angry on our behalf. So if you look at the audience, among the 327 people on the show today, which is the count apparently, how many are white? How many are black? Probably the majority, I'm guessing, are Asian, right? So we're talking in our own echo chamber, and it's not doing any good because we already know the problems. We feel it, right? So we need to have white people in the room. We should be talking to white people and Black people because white culture has made us separated because American culture racks and stacks minorities by threat to white culture. The least threatening has been Northeast Asians, model minorities, right? And then you can work your way down to, Hispanics and then down to Black Americans, especially Black Americans who are descendant of slaves, not recent immigrants, right? So they pit us against each other with this hierarchy. And culturally,
Tom, you know what? I want to interrupt just real quick
right.
because this entire conversation
Yeah.
has really gotten me going in racial segregation history.
Yeah.
So I started looking at South Africa, and what you're saying is reflected in South Africa. They actually had whites on the top,
Yep.
Blacks at the bottom,
Yep.
the slaves at the bottom, descendants of slaves, new immigrants are different, Indians were different, and guess where Asians were? Asians were called honorary whites.
Honorary.
Yeah. Right. So
That's nuts. They
Yeah.
still have rights, but they're called honorary whites.
Right.
And they pitted everybody against each other with this method.
Mhm. So when you look at the Asian violence on Asians we've seen in the US lately, right? A lot of that's been done by African Americans. But if you think about why would they be so frustrated to take it out on another minority, is because we are the model minority according to white culture, and where they are nobody. So that's why. But we need to embrace it and get them to. We need to work together, right? Right now, white culture is succeeding in putting us apart. So that's why I'm angry all the time, and I need to be more like General Taguba. But I also had a completely different upbringing than General Taguba. I'm half white, half Asian. My father went to Berkeley. First got to go to college out of his family, but he went to Berkeley in the 60s. So he's pretty progressive. He married a Japanese woman from Japan, but he was also in the Foreign Service. So I grew up in an upper middle class and low end, pretty much upper middle class. And so I went to white neighborhoods and white schools, right? And I resisted being Asian completely, 100%. There's a reason why I worked my neck out from the time I was 12 to have a big neck, and I never liked wearing glasses, and I wanted to be big, and I did all the contact sports. It was purely based on insecurity. And I was the first person to make Asian jokes. I would say, hey, you don't want me driving DWO, driving while Oriental. It's worse than driving while drunk, right? Just to get the lap, but more than that, to take the power of them ridiculing me away, and I got control of it. But I did that all the way through my entire career. So it took me to be almost 50 years old to wake up and become an anti-racist. And I come from a household of progressives. So if it's that difficult for me to wake up, then how difficult is it for a white person to wake up, right? So we had a lot of work to do. But so growing up, I didn't want to look like Long Duck Dong, right? From I forget the movie from the 80s. And then I don't want to be, if you're old enough, General Taguba is old enough to remember Gunsmoke, and there's Hop Sing on Gunsmoke, right?
Yeah.
Hop Sing, and then if you look at Have Gun Will Travel, a radio show, there was Hey Boy was the name of the Asian character, and I don't want to be like that, and so it made me reject half of who I was, which is shameful. So I joined a Marine Corps, and I went into the infantry intentionally because I was insecure. So I wanted to go prove myself. So that's why I joined what I thought, the propaganda is really good in the Marine Corps. I wanted to join the toughest service and be the toughest part of the toughest service. So that's why I joined. But
is the toughest and the top and the best and the brightest.
yeah, we do the good advertising job.
It's really great. The best and the brightest go to the Marines.
Yeah, that's what they say.
That's what they say.
It's not true. So I fell in love with the Marine Corps because I like leading and changing people's lives. But I never in fact, I ran the other way when I saw an Asian officer struggling because I did not want to be associated with him. And I have Black friends that say the same thing that they've done to other Black officers because they didn't want to be associated. So I ran away instead of helping them. Right now, after El Paso shootings, where brown people were being hunted down and killed for the color of their skin, I understood viscerally and in my heart what it was to be a Black American for the first time, right? Because being pulled over by a cop. I understood it intellectually, but I didn't feel it. But after El Paso, I felt it. And that's when I switched and I started reading and studying and asking questions. And that's when Black Americans started to talk to me. They would not talk to me about race. Even though I've known some of my Black friends for 30 years in the Marine Corps, we didn't have a true discussion about race until I published my first article. Because that means I was vulnerable and taking a side, right? Yeah. And I'm exposing myself, I'm losing friends, but now other people say, oh, I know exactly where he stands and I can trust him. So that's how I've been getting so much feedback. But
Hey,
until,
Tom, there's some speakers, there's some viewers today who have not read your article. Can you give us a little synopsis of what it was all about and
well,
what inspired you to write it?
if evolved, and I could talk about that in the systemic racism part when we get to that, because that's what my first article was about: systemic racism in the way we select and promote our officers and who ends up as a commandant. And so I'll explain that process down there. But that's why I ended up staying in the Marine Corps, and I'm ashamed of how I acted for most of my career. I was a good leader, but I was no way an anti-racist at all. I was just a non-racist. Would I stop someone saying chink around me? Of course. Would I have stopped someone saying the N-word around me? Of course I would have. But I didn't hunt and look for systemic racism or ask why certain people were evaluated or thought of lower than others. I never asked.
So what kind of systemic discrimination exists in the military today, right now?
You want to start with General Taguba?
You might say there's some conscious and unconscious way of systemic
Conscious and unconscious
or
systemic.
institutional bias.
Yes.
And then the percentages show that. I mean, promotions, like Tom would said, there's about 16% in the military that are Asians, and about 25% Blacks, and the rest, a smidgen on Native Americans and also Latinos. But the preponderance of the military, I'll speak with the Army, is about 70 to 75%. So, so how do you promote equality? Well, you can't, but you can promote equity proportionally, right? But sometimes it doesn't happen that way. Today, the minorities in the Army today, 2022, there are 36 African Americans generals. There are 5 Asian American generals. There's 0 Native American and 1 Hispanic. And you add that all up, it's not equitable. And my measurement is that we have an association of the United States Army Convention every October. And there's a big wall at the Washington Convention Center that shows the faces of all the famous generals in the military, right? And I would count maybe 1 or 2 or 3 that, 4 Asian Americans on there. I said, do you call that equity? No, because we do that, it's in some sense, as we call it, the manner of performance. I'm not suggesting that you put favoritism in there, because you have to compete for the rank, and you have to compete for the, you have to be eligible to be promoted, but it's never always that way. This is my opinion. People have this bias of who they want to get promoted or not promoted.
Yep.
But we say, well, let's do this thing equally, equitably, and to include them, because we are now in the age of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it never happens that way.
Nope.
So that was my point, that if I ever got to the point that I'm going to help somebody through the gauntlet of getting promoted to competitiveness, but I cannot help them when I'm not on the promotion.
Yep.
Okay, and that's not favoritism. I want them to be as competitive as everybody else, like I did. You gotta do a lot of work. But if somebody says, well, somebody once told me my only fault is that English is my second language. Well, that's true, but I didn't know how to take that comment. Hell, everybody has a second language, especially when they are in parts of the South or parts of the North or Boston, that they have an accent. Well, do you call that English? Probably. But there were times that sometimes you can't understand each other because we don't speak the King's English. We speak a little differently.
So the stats do prove that they're recruiting more minorities. They are coming in, at least in the Marine Corps. I'm talking for Marine Corps. The statistics do show that, but they're leaving. They don't stay, right? Why don't they stay? Well, partly because Fox News is playing on every channel and Tucker Carlson is spouting the great white replacement theory, right? In fact, Tucker Carlson had on a PhD about 6 months ago, who was explaining why there's an economic disparity between Black Americans and white Americans on average, because Black Americans on average have a 10% or 10-point lower IQ. This guy said that on Fox News, right? And it's playing in every office in the Marine Corps. So as officers, we're supposed to be inclusive, but they're so blind to their own privileges and biases that it's playing on the background while they're talking to their diverse group of enlisted Marines, and they're clueless as to how exclusive that is. So it's hard to explain inclusion. So we can measure diversity. That's a number, it's a percentage. How do you measure inclusion? That's a feeling. So we explain that with anecdotes. The first thing I do when I share these anecdotes, white people say, those are anecdotes, show me numbers. So it's a hard fight to get people to listen, right? And the language team, General Taguba is so right. I know 3 brilliant Marine Corps generals, all of them from the South, and all of them talk like good old boys. And that's fine, because they're great leaders and they can write. That's what really matters. But they have a shtick to make Marines kind of loosen up around them, right? But can you imagine a Black officer talking with African-American vernacular English and make it, or jive, right? Can you making it beyond the rank of captain? There's no way an African-American could talk like he does at home, or she does at home at work, period. So they have to code switch every day, which is exhausting, right? And in the Marine Corps, we try to exploit the opponent by exploiting windows of opportunity that we find. And we create windows of opportunity through creativity and through tempo, right? Tempo is done when you can smash the chain of command so your youngest Marines can think like you, which means the boss has to be utterly transparent and explain everything and be his or herself, right? All the time, so they understand you. We like the way we understand our parents. But if you have to code switch to come to work, how are you going to do that? So we give up our tempo because we can't be ourselves. And then we give up creativity because we don't feel included. Because creativity is nothing more than an analysis of things into their component parts, and then the synthesis of those parts into something new and unheard of. But if all the parts are coming from white males, all Christian, a lot of them from the South, how many times can you break up how they think and put it together in new and unheard of ways? They can't. We've already done it. So we're throwing away our diversity. Meanwhile, our main opponent right now is China, who already has our industrial capability and our technological might. So, but they don't have our diversity. I have a friend that worked at Home Depot as a manager. He had 250 employees from 81 countries. That doesn't happen in China, right? So we're throwing away our one natural resource that China does not have. So we're just going to go toe to toe. It's stupid, right? So why do we end up here? From the Marine Corps case, the Commandant of the Marine Corps is a 4-star general, right? So he's an officer. A lot of people will point to how enlisteds, we have very good diversity and they make it to the top. But we have to remember that enlisted Marines, the most senior enlisted Marine who's been in for 40 years is junior to the most junior second lieutenant who just got commissioned 30 seconds ago. Officers make policy, enlisted advise. Officers are the ones that shape things, right? So it doesn't matter in a way that we've had so much diversity amongst the enlisted population when it comes to changing policy. We need officers. Now, the Commandant is the top officer. He comes from a pool of about 15 3-star generals at any given time in the Marine Corps, right? And the Commandant, with one exception, has always been infantry. So it will probably continue to be infantry for the foreseeable future. Amongst those 15 3-stars, there's about 5 or 6 that are infantry officers by background. So the Commandant comes from 5 or 6, a pool of 5 or 6 infantry 3-stars. That's it. Now, at the basic school, the first school that all officers attend before they are, and that's where they're assigned their military occupational specialty, such as infantry officer, intelligence officer, or communications officer, and then they go off to their school for that specialty. But everybody goes to the 6-month school and they learn to be a provisional rifle platoon commander. Why? Because in the Marine Corps, we feel that all other military occupational specialties support the infantry. Therefore, to support the infantry well, you should know what they do. So they're all forced to be infantry officers, right? Provisional.
You know, a lot of Blacks and Asians, we didn't grow up
right.
with operating a
right.
firearm or defending a ranch. That is
Right.
not part of.
That's right. And
culture.
my first paper talks about the socioeconomic backgrounds of whether they were in Boy Scouts, they had an opportunity to swim in the country club pool,
Yes.
et cetera, et cetera. That is part of it. And whites will push back going, I didn't belong to Boy Scouts. I never got to shoot. I didn't get to swim. And then after I wrote that paper, I got a lot of feedback from Black officers for the first time, and women and Asians. and they tell me it's the pressure of being someone you're not. I did it my whole career, but wasn't aware of it. It's the pressure to change. So you come from HBCU, you haven't been around white organization, and you show up at the basic school and you have to shoot, swim, and do land navigation, the first 3 big tests. And meanwhile, Fox News is playing, and then you don't have any extra time to shave, even though a lot of African Americans have folliculitis. This changed this year in the Marine Corps, 2022. We've finally given acknowledging that Blacks have folliculitis or can have folliculitis and need more time. Meanwhile, they're just cutting themselves and bleeding when they're on a rush at boot camp or officer candidate school. So that's the culture they're coming into, right? It's a complete earth-shattering event for them. So then they feel excluded. And a lot of them don't want to, a lot of Black people I know and Asians don't want to join the infantry, right? They come in to get a skill and get out, because there's a lot of history of how the military has been used against brown and Black people and police. So they get the skill and get out. They're not interested in serving in a way a white male would be, because a white male looks at the Constitution in a very different way than a former or descendant of a slave, right? So we divide the classes, each group of each TBS class, the basic school class, into thirds. So let's say we have a class of 300, the top third, middle third, and bottom third. Then we take all the billets or slots that are available for the infantry, let's say, and we divide those into thirds. So let's say there's 30 slots, 10 go to the top third, 10 go to the middle third, 10 go to the bottom third. The reason behind that is to make sure that every specialty has its share of people at the bottom, middle, and top, right? By this way, it's better to be in the top of the bottom third than to be at the bottom of the top third. You have a greater chance of getting what you want because you actually pick, if that makes sense, right? Now, all the lieutenants come in and they choose what they want, right? And then they do some bartering. The instructors do some bartering based on things, but we try to make it so everybody gets what they want or something close to what they want. Then we submit the list to headquarters of Marine Corps. The list always comes back saying we want more minority representation in the infantry, right? So a lot of the African Americans who struggle because of cultural adjustments, and maybe they don't have a background that facilitates doing well at the basic school, are in the bottom third, right? And so when we're forced to make Black officers into infantrymen, they're coming from the bottom third, right? And they didn't do well in a school that's based on infantry. And now they're forced to be an infantry officer. And now they're reinforcing all the negative biases and stereotypes that white officers already have about Black officers, because they're not as good. Why aren't they as good? We think they're not as smart. That's actually come out of people's mouths. And so they reinforce that preconceived notion, and then they don't do well, and then they get out, right? And meanwhile, they don't see any Black officers that ever made it to Commandant. It's all been white males, Christians, for the last 250 years straight, nonstop. So why would they stay? They get out, right? So then when you're going before a board, right, we don't have any way of measuring people's biases, but we could. It would cost zero money to build an algorithm and be able to crunch the data on how officers write reports on their subordinates, right? So
We would call this like a bias report, right?
Right. Well, it's an evaluation, and it's based on your subjectivity, most of it. And there's some hard data, like your physical fitness score, and you write it. But we have the data to be able to take every officer's profile and how we've written on people, and we could rack and stack by grade, so from sergeant, staff sergeant, all the way lieutenant, captain, etc., by gender and race, or even religion, and we can see where the numbers fall. We should start doing that immediately when you're a lieutenant. So then you start learning about your own biases, and you have a chance to adjust your bias score, right? But when you're before a promotion board, we should have a board that all has a proven neutral bias score, right? And then the person that's being looked at to be promoted, they have a bad evaluation, then the briefer should brief. If that evaluation came from an officer that has a poor bias score, or he could say it's a great bias score or a neutral bias score, so this guy is obviously weak, whatever, and it will show racism in every direction, or sexism in every direction. It will solve everything. But I brought that up to the commandant, and he hasn't done it, even though we could do it overnight. Why? Because we'd be forced to face our own biases in the Marine Corps for the first time. Right now, we
You
have plausible denial.
Yeah, you would have you would have no
Right.
officers able to determine promotion in the
Right.
ranks if you
Right.
had a bias report.
Right. So you get the black, anybody who has a potential, a women or a minority who could be commandant, they just never make it to that track. They peter out. Either they get out on their own or they're not competitive enough on the boards. A general that just got promoted, a black general friend of mine, Tony Henderson, he got promoted last year to brigadier general on his 4th book, right? 4 years he waited to get promoted. First 3 times he get promoted. What changed? A Washington Post article came out about him and put pressure on the Marine Corps. He gets picked up on his 4th book. So was he a better person all of a sudden? Was he more qualified all of a sudden? No, the Marine Corps realized we better change something, right? So that's how the white powers is able to stay in power, because they own all the policy positions, and anybody that could threaten them is weeded out before they ever get to the top. And it starts at the very beginning with what we call affirmative action, by placing black representation into a job they don't like, just so we can say we have the numbers. That's why. So we need to fix, that's the systemic racism that happens, and people don't see it. It's very easy to fix. Very easy to fix.
You know, this has really made me think about a lot of things, including military culture, vis-a-vis American culture, vis-a-vis just everyday Americans and how they go about their lives, completely ignorant that systemic and institutionalized bias is happening. So Tony, I have a question for you, which is, a lot of people will say, well, you know, all this is really sad to hear. However, isn't it true that folks who serve in the military should be bullies and hardcore and yelling at everyone? Isn't that how wars get won? Shouldn't hate crimes and hate incidences and bullying and calling names toughen the soldier? Tony, what do you think about that? Because I hear that a lot as a mom. Moms talk about their kids going into service and they'll say, yeah, well, you're going to have to face a lot of bullying and harassment and hazing, and that's just part of the culture. Is that true, Tony? Do you like what they're saying there? What do you think there in terms of?
So, you know, the military is tough enough as it is. We have a commitment to serve our country, and we guarantee that commitment with our lives. I mean, there's a condition of employment, so to speak. When you sign that contract, you're going to go to war despite or notwithstanding your specialty, as Tom would say. You could be a personnel person, but before you become a personnel person, you're an infantryman. You could be a cook, but before you do that, before you get that training, you're an infantryman. So everybody's an infantryman. A musician is an infantryman, and they need to handle, and they can go to war at any time. But when you go to training, yes, it's tough. But we've had enough occasions of trainees that are dying because of abuse, of bullying, of incidents where they are performing non-training events. I'll give you some example. You know, I know Tom knows this, where a Marine trainee, a recruit, Pakistani American, who wanted to serve his country, was tormented by his drill instructor, made him to go inside of a dryer, a big dryer, and then they tumbled him in there because he was not a non-performer service. But you know, it's a drill sergeant instructor's job to train them to be effective, to be successful, and not do it that way. If they cannot merit the style of leadership, not style, the training of a Marine Corps, in the Marine Corps or even in the Army, then you discharge them. You don't force them into something that they cannot tolerate. And that particular, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, he committed suicide.
He did.
He jumped off a building.
He jumped off the exterior ladder well.
Stairway, and did that. And there's 2 other incidents where 2 Chinese American Marines, this happened in Afghanistan, where they completed their training, they were deployed. One of them is Lance Corporal Harry Chu, whose aunt is Congresswoman Judy Chu, where he was subjected to hazing, abuse, assault, because they thought that he wasn't doing his job. And Harry committed suicide.
Yep.
And 3 of his Marine buddies were court-martialed. One spent 30 days in jail because suicide is also a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. But they court-martialed the 3 because they were the ones that was assaulting him. Several months later, Private First Class Danny Chen committed suicide in the Army. Same thing happened to him. They made him dig holes, foxholes, subjected him to big rocks were being thrown at him, no water. Then he could, where was he going to go to seek help? Where he's an outpost. And he went up on the tower that we were supposed to be guarding, and he committed suicide. But at this time, about 8 people were court-martialed, and some were actually served in jail. Why do they have to do that? America's moms and dads provided and entrusted them to the United States Marine Corps, the United States Army, to provide them with discipline and education. Harry and Danny enlisted willingly to be a soldier, to be a Marine, because they wanted to be that. They wanted to serve their country. I was recalled back, not on active duty, in 2012 after Danny Chen committed suicide because a group of Chinese Americans decided to help the mom and dad who did not speak English. That was their only son. Both Danny and Harry were both only sons, only child, by the way. And they wanted to know, why did this happen to their sons? And so they said, well, maybe because you're Asian American, Tony, you've served in that capacity as a general officer, you can probably explain to them why. I said, no, I mean, I'm for them. Why did senior non-commissioned officers did that to them? They didn't have to do that to them. They were not the enemy. They're serving in war. The enemy is the bad guy. These are not the bad guys. You just needed what we call some loving, but not in a bad way. You're supposed to train them. You're supposed to protect them. You're supposed to give them welfare. If they're not doing their job, train them or take them out of the outpost and then send them back where they could be, you might say, have some remedial training. I had a chance to meet Danny's parents in New York City. I was invited to talk to them. And I tried to explain to them that whatever happened to their son was inconceivable. It was indisputably wrong. But I was apologizing for myself. But I was also apologizing to the fact that our country did not honor their commitment to their son to serve in our country.
Tony, what are the causes of this level of violence against Asians who are in service? And what are some of the things we can do to help reverse it? People like lay people would say ignorant things like there should be an educational series. How about some videos? I mean, what are some things to
let me tell you what we do in the military as commanders. When you command a unit, it starts from the top. Starts from the commandant, the chief of staff of the army, who puts together their leadership philosophy. Something that's understandable all the way down to the lowest ranks, men and women alike, of other color. And the thing is that we want our units to have to be our commanders to promote and advance a positive, healthy, and safe command climate. That's their responsibility. That's their responsibility. They're held responsible and accountable to what happens in that unit or what they fail to do.
So change has to happen in the commandant level.
All the way from the top.
So
but they're so far up that they don't get the chance to see what's happening on the foxholes, you might say. So for me, as a company commander captain, that was my first rule. We're going to have a positive and healthy and safe command climate. That means I will protect, I will feed, I will train, I will pay, not just you, but also your family. We bring ourselves to that responsibility. And I learned that when I was a lieutenant. everything we do, we have to be safe. There's teamwork in there. If anyone decides to violate that or not follow that, is answerable to me. We'll try to remediate that with training. But if they don't, if they do it the second time, they're out of my unit. I've had the success of only relieving 2 captains in my whole time in the Army. A large organization. One captain decided that it was so mad about a soldier smoking a fuel tank that he was, instead of just saying, remove that from your mouth, he decided to try to strike the cigarette off his mouth, except he missed. He slapped the soldier. Whether he did it intentionally or unintentionally, he slapped and assaulted a soldier.
Assaulted a soldier.
Right. So he was dismissed from the United States Army.
I have a very stupid question. In corporate America, when a commandant type person, right, the CEO,
Yeah.
chairman, or the president of a segment or whatnot, they promote activities and practices that's against the corporate code, right? They promote bullying, or they allow harassment, they
Yeah.
allow racist names being said, they allow hazing. The shareholders can fire them, and the families and employees can sue the company, right?
Right.
So is this something that Americans can do? Can we actually fire commandants and have a petition and sue the military? Does it have to go that way? Or is the military protected? It's protected. There is no way
there-
that a citizen can have a right.
There have been general officers that have been relieved of command for violating a policy, not necessarily a rule. Okay. For example, inappropriate touching with a female, or having some kind of a secret affair. There have been, and I can tell you of one where one had a inappropriate relationship. The family, the general was separated from his wife, and of course they're not divorced, and was known to being dating other women at the time. Well, a scorned woman decided to write a memorandum to the Secretary of Defense. Had an investigation. He was reduced to 1 rank in charge and removed from his command. It's just one of the many examples that happens today. It's called conduct. Okay. Any inappropriate conduct by a commander or anybody that's in command, or even leading or managing anybody, is subjected to corrective action. The whole idea with the Chen Incident, and that was not supposed to happen. I had to testify before Congress, and I had to testify before Congresswoman Judy Chu on why that happened to her nephew, and she attended that court-martial proceeding in Hawaii, where the Marine, the senior Marine that violated his rights and abused him and assaulted him, only got 30 days in jail. They could not prosecute him for the death, the suicide. But you see, I goes back to your question. It's tough to have a military life. There's a lot of benefits associated with it, but the assignments, the constant moves, the different schools that the children have to go through, the husbands or the wife that's in uniform, deployed all the time, absent from the home. They're living in communities that don't even accept them. That's all part and parcel of military life. But when we have kids that wants to join the Army or the Marine Corps, the Navy, or the Air Force, and then are subjected to abuse of any type, that drill sergeant or that commander ought to be relieved. We had an incident in 1995, 96, where drill sergeants were preying on women recruits, sexually assaulting them and the like. And we thought it was just happening in one location. Then they did an investigation that it was happening in every location. drill sergeants were actually taking advantage of the women. You know, even in a combat, we had 99 cases of sexual assaults when I was deployed in Iraq and Kuwait. 99. So what is that happening? You know, and the hazing and the like. But it goes back to what the command is supposed to be doing, to enforce a healthy and positive and safe environment, to enforce that. And that enforcement happens with the non-commissioned officers that you have, that you trust. And they better hear that. Otherwise, if they take license of violating that, they could be charged with the uniform, under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And there's a penalty associated with that. When they are discharged as a veteran, if they receive a dishonorable discharge or anything below general discharge, they don't get their benefits. They may end up in jail. You know.
We don't do it
And,
enough with officers.
Yeah, and the officers too.
They don't do it enough with officers though.
They don't do that with officers. And the Marine Corps, then so
No.
going back to the Marine Corps, Tom, I know that we can talk forever about this, but in terms of how do we force, it's not help, how do we force officers and commandants to respect the code of conduct? How do we,
Yep.
is it the media? Does it have to take the New York Times and the Washington Post to report on something for that respect to happen?
I think, well, first of all, we're still a very industrialized system in the military, the way we train them. So it's a machine. In the Marine Corps, we pride ourselves on being the youngest, cheapest force. I don't think we're the cheapest force. There's a lot of second, third order effects to having a young force. But anyway, we have to recruit about 30,000 Marines a year. Then we keep them for 4 years, and then we throw out 95% of them. So the entire Marine Corps, or I'd say about 95% of the Marine Corps, is completely changing over every 4, 5, 6 years. It's crazy. So just when we're getting a return on investment on a Marine, they're out the door. So one, we're treating them like cogs in a wheel. So our human talent management is terrible, right? Number one. So we don't treat them as precious commodities. Every human we have should be treated like that. So when they make a mistake, just like our own kids, you don't love, I'll tell you, I used to say I love my Marines like I love my kids. That was before I had kids. And then now I have kids, I can't love them the same way because you go crazy every time they get hurt or killed in combat. But you do those things that you would do for your kids, right? The same actions. So when you hear somebody say, when you say, good morning, Marine, and the Marine goes, good morning, and he doesn't look at you, hey, that's off, right? Are you gonna reapproach that and dig at the problem and pick, right? And if you keep picking, people will say, hey, Hobbs really cares. He means it when he says his door is open. But most officers say, my door is open, but they don't go out and actually pick, right? I had a high school counselor. My daughter moved to a new high school her junior year. The counselor said, hey, my door is open. She should come anytime. And why? I don't know why she didn't come to me. And I said, because you're an adult. She doesn't know you. What teenager would go see anybody who says my door is open? Trust me, you have to earn it, right? So commanders are not judged on that. It's very hard to measure. Leadership is very intangible. So we focus on those things that are easy to objectify, like how well all your Marines shoot, or how few DUIs you have in your unit. It's these things that are objectively measured, right? But that doesn't necessarily say you're a good leader, right? You can never know your Marines. In fact, a lot of Marines, a lot of officers are rewarded by not making waves, right? So if you're not at the bottom, or you're not a bottom feeder, and you're just an average guy or average woman, and you keep doing your job, do what you're told, and never cause waves, you'll make it to Lieutenant Colonel in a Marine Corps and get your retirement, right? So there's no incentive to push against a boss that's unethical, right? Or let's say you have an 18-year-old Marine that drinks or drives to a bar, drinks, and instead of driving home, he takes a taxi and uses the unit funds to pay for the taxi, right? Now he's on official documents, right? As a leader, depending on the Marine, if he's already a bad Marine, I might use that to get him out. But if he's a Marine I don't know, or a good Marine, yeah, he uses excellent judgment by not taking a taxi, right? Or by taking a taxi and not driving. So I probably would not put a permanent damage to his record, right? I would address it. I don't know how I would address it, depend, but I would address it. But I wouldn't necessarily punish him and damage his career, right? But what if your boss says, no, you will punish him or her? Then what do you do, right? So a lot of officers just don't want to know that stuff. the more information you know, the messier the decisions get, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the officers that get paid more money to make those messy decisions and apply judgment to black and white policy. Life isn't black and white, but too many officers don't want to make that, so they just hide and really not earning their pay. And I know both commanders of those Marines, one that killed himself in Afghanistan and the one that was hazed in Paris Island. I know both of the commanders, and they're both oblivious to, they don't have any empathy for anybody that doesn't look like them, and they haven't taken the time to learn it, right? So they don't ask the right questions. I had a Korean Marine, Korean immigrant, who came over when he was 13 or 14. He still had an accent, and he went through my infantry training battalion school. And on his exit survey, he wrote down, I'm happy that I have instructors who are not racist, right? And so all the chain of command who are all white, they say, hey, sir, look, this is a great, I read every evaluation, so I pull it out and go, this is weird. And they go, no, it's great. He's saying we're not racist. I said, but I know how East Asians culture talks, right? The listener in Asia has responsible for receiving the message, whereas in the Western culture, the speaker is responsible for making sure the message is heard, right? So that's why we always speak louder when no one understands us. But he was telling us something, and it was weird. So I said, go back and ask him why he wrote that. So they went back, came back, hell no, he said what he meant. So like, nah, that doesn't sit right. I ran into him at the gym one morning, and I said, hey, Kent, come here. So he comes talk to me. I said, why'd you write that? He gave me all the standard stuff, just said it because I meant it. And I kept picking. I go, no. And I kept picking. He finally said he was in the cafeteria, and the sister battalion, another or adjacent unit, had instructors that were calling Asians chinks and slopes, right? And he heard that the other unit, and our instructors didn't do that. You know why they didn't do that? Because I would have crushed them if they did. So they knew that. But he was trying to tell us that there was something going on, right? So we're not educated on other people's cultures. As an officer, you should be, I think we should not have technical degrees. I think we should have Bachelor of Arts in Humanities or something, right? Because we deal with people. So we should be learning about how Asian culture speaks and talks and how they communicate. We should be learning that stuff as officers. So 6 months in an industrial school to make an officer is too short, right? That 6 months has been there for years, decades, when all the officers were white males, right? So there was no cultural adjustment that had to be made. Now we're becoming more diverse. So 6 months doesn't fit anymore. We have to do a prep course or make it longer to allow for adjustments to come in and teach people about how to deal with people. We don't teach that at all. The last thing you said, how can we fire generals as civilians? Yes, you can. I was irritated, very irritated with a pullout from Afghanistan like everybody else. But I was even more irritated by the outrage that the average American showed, right? Because they didn't care at all about Afghanistan for the first 20 years, right? Where were they when we went into Iraq? So if citizens care, then the military would be held accountable. So how do we get citizens to care without a draft? With an all-volunteer force, it's too easy for Americans to not know what's going on with the military, right? I say we need a war tax. So every time we want to go to war, every person in America or every adult should pay for their entire family per head, whatever X amount percentage of your income for war tax. Then we could actually pay for our wars instead of printing money like we did for Iraq and Afghanistan. And the average American now has skin in the game. So like if we did have a war tax, imagine we're saying there's chemical weapons in Iraq. Do you think the average American go, wait, let's see that evidence one more time? Because I don't feel like spending $1,000 per head per year for this war with lousy evidence, right? Or when the Afghanistan papers came out showing all the lies we've been telling to the politicians, to the presidents, administrations, where was the outrage then from this average citizen? They don't even know about the papers, right? Or what about the 10-year mark on the 20-year war? Did they question why are we still paying war tax for 10 years? And you're saying we got another 10 years? So right now, American citizens don't care, right? They only care when we're embarrassed on the national stage. So there's no pressure on politicians and congressmen and congresswomen to hold military commanders accountable, right? That's the disconnect. Right now, the military is too separated from civilian population. Administration, presidents, the executive branch has too much power to go to war without talking to Congress, right? And no one's holding anybody accountable. And the only way to do that is to put American citizens' skin in the game. And I think the best way to do that is a war tax.
No, I love it. I love all these ideas. The war tax is great, holding the military accountable, educating the officers from the commander and commandant down. I love all this. I have a question for both Tom and Tony, which is, when diplomats are getting trained to serve their country, they're required to take like a 3 or 6 month class sometimes on cultural intelligence. So they have to learn about the religions of everybody. Even if their country is Muslim, they have to learn about Christianity. They have to learn about history. They have to learn about culture, customs, what to say, what not to say. Is this something that's taught in the military, in the Marine Corps, in the Army? Is cultural intelligence seen as an effective tool, even a weapon to greater effective teamwork?
No, I'll tell you, I'm glad you brought that up because there's a lack of just trying to initiate knowledge on cultural awareness and cultural literacy. I mean,
Literacy.
everybody should be at least knowing that, hey, there's a lot of people that doesn't look like me. And it's pretty easy. You can go download it on the website. Cultural awareness is lacking in the schools today. Cultural literacy is lacking in some of the organizations today. When we went to war in Iraq, for example, the troops came back with foldouts, right? Like, what kind of nationalities and ethnicities are you going to see in Iraq, and Kurds or what do you call that? The different religions and whatever have you.
Shia and Sunni, yeah, Shia and Sunni.
Yeah. So
But they have foldouts, but
that a foldout, right?
Foldout.
That was there was no immersion of the
that's
troops
the
to say,
extent of the
"These are
cultural
kinds of-"
intelligence is a foldout.
Right.
Yep.
And their best word is kaf, which is says stop. Wassalamu alaikum, may God bless you, or whatever the case may be. But they didn't know the culture that you're not supposed to touch somebody like a woman, their bag, and touch their Quran. That's cultural awareness.
Can't
But
do that.
that's the reason why they were all mad, because you're touching. You're not supposed to stare at the woman. That's another cultural awareness thing. And then bow and kind of hold your hand. But we post ourselves into the ugly American setting that we are here to liberate you until something happened called torture, and now we are the occupiers. You broke your promise that you're going to liberate us from Saddam Hussein. That's part of cultural awareness. We go into wars today, like in Afghanistan, not knowing what the hell some of the languages were, how they live, and the whole thing. And you go, geez, you see people living in muds, no lights, no toilets, and stuff like that. Instead of saying why and how can we help you, you start shooting them up because everybody looks like them. We had that problem just about anywhere. In Vietnam, for instance, we hired Vietnamese to teach us mostly as translators, but they're not cultural awareness or cultural ambassadors, so to speak, that says that these are good people. There may be some bad people in there, but you need to know the country before you go there. Then we start having this immersion training that takes about 9 weeks to do before you go off and fight a war in a foreign country.
Would it be interesting to the military for Asian Hall of Fame to produce a cultural intelligence immersion program? Because that's something we can do. Military folks, regardless of their background, they love celebrities. They listen to celebrities. They also listen to their officers and commanders, but they love celebrities. And that's what we have. We can galvanize our leaders and our influencers and our celebrities to create some kind of a cultural intelligence program that, yes, is serious, but also fun in a way and real and authentic. Do you think that would be helpful for the military today?
I do.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I do because the military, especially because Marine Corps, full of insecure men, right, like me. And so we tend to use force on everything, which is related to your hazing question. We use force and we use bully, right? So if you have a problem, like I took over the Marine Infantry Training Battalion, which is where they train all the enlisted infantry Marines, right? When I took over, they had a tremendous problem of Marines going AWOL because they have a chance to go home and they never came back, right? So what's a typical reaction to that? More force, restrictions, or you have to be home by 10. You must go out with 3 people. We make it more and more restrictive, right? But the moment we haven't changed anything, the moment we lift that force away, what happens? They go do what they want. So we need to change. I want them to come back because they want to come back, right?
Right.
Which means you have to make training fun. You have to really want to be interested in developing your people, and then they actually want to come back, right? Homesickness ends when you feel like I got a home. So instead of having a bully as your squad leader or instructor, you have a big brother, right? And once you get that to switch, incidents go down. And they want to come back because they don't want to let their big brother down, right? Especially young people. Their frontal cortex hasn't developed yet. They can't even do judgment yet, but they don't like letting people down. So you initiate that virtuous cycle of good habits through personal loyalty, gaining personal loyalty, right? Well, a course like that, where you start to understand and have empathy for people that look different than you, means you can connect them in a way that is more binding than just yelling at them, right?
Right.
Or not, because you don't understand them, you just don't deal with them, right? When you can make a real human connection, behavior changes. So I do think courses like that are, I don't know how successful you'd be in trying to penetrate the Marine Corps, but good commanders, I would pull somebody in to talk to us anyway on my own without asking. But it's not a default habit in the Marine Corps at all.
Yeah, just, we in the military, we have what they call the Equal Opportunity Office. And that's supposed to be a forum where, not a forum, but an office that deals with complaints and whatever happens. But we typically, our best effort to have cultural awareness is when you go to Fort Irwin, which is down the road from you, near Barstow, is that they have war training, simulated war training. And so they would hire the local communities who have Arab speaking people to role play either the villagers or the bad guys. That's the closest we can get to a cultural awareness, because we're trying to mimic, right? But that's not cultural awareness. That's a military tactical operation.
Right.
But I think it merits that we got to spend some time, if we're going to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, to learn who's next and right to your left and to your right, because there's so many blended couples and people out there today that you don't know what that nationality they have. I was going to school in Idaho way back when. They said, "Do you speak English?" I go, "Of course I speak English." I said, "Oh, you speak English very well." But my son, when we were in Korea, they thought he was an orphan because he was playing with the other Koreans when we were having Easter egg and stuff like that. And my soldier said, "We met an orphan that spoke really good English." And I said, "Well, point him to me." He says, "There he is over there running with the ball." I said, "Yeah, that's my son." Sean Taguba. It's just they're either curious about it because and English is hard. That's a hard language to speak anyway, because it's my second language. However, if you marry someone because you're in love with them, or you go someplace where you want to be accepted, or you're just visiting, you ought to understand that culture. At least be aware of that culture.
See, I think cultural intelligence, it might trigger something for the military organization, because they like words like military intelligence.
Yeah.
They like words like
central
intelligence.
Call it cultural literacy.
Cultural literacy is also very good. But see, the word literacy and intelligence, it kind of sounds like a tool to add to your weapons kit, right? That you can actually win the war and bring the unit closer. With the idea of cultural intelligence, cultural literacy, now we come to the Recession Act. And I know we've run 15 minutes over, but I didn't want to squeeze this in because it's something that I do feel that Asian Hall of Fame with our platform can bring awareness to, particularly around October's Filipino month, and then all of the advocacy that we're doing on the Hill. So the Recession Act is an egregious act. Tony, can you describe a little bit about what work has been done already to advocate for the reversal of the act?
Well, not very much, because we just started. And I'll just explain to the audience what the Recession Act is. The Recession Act was born out of Congress in February 1946, following the end of World War II in the Philippines. And that dates back. The United States Army always used Filipinos who are nationals, the US nationals under colonial rule. They've used them during the Philippine-American War. They used them during the Philippine Insurrection. And then, of course, a lot of people served under the United States flag, led by General MacArthur in 1941 to 1945. So after the war, there was a matter of entitlements that was owed to them, to over 200,000 Filipinos who fought under the United States flag. A promise that was made by Franklin Roosevelt, the war, when he mobilized the troops. That says on July 26, 1941, if you fight, they ordered MacArthur to mobilize them to fight the Japanese. Okay, now it's after the war, and folks were being, you might say, reconstituted. The forces were reconstituted, and units were being formed again because all of those units disappeared during the war. So when that happened, the two elements of that Recession Act was passed by Congress, and it had two elements to it. One, that they will not be able to pay them their entitlements, meaning pay. Two, they will not be able to grant them U.S. citizenship, even though they had being a U.S. national, that they should be granted, at least for application, U.S. citizenship. That act took that away. In other words, none of the 200,000 were to be paid, but they tried to do a trick. They paid the Philippine government 220 million out of the 3 billion that was owed to the government as part of their reconstruction, which did not merit any pay to those who fought and those who died. 57,000 were killed in action. And when I'm saying soldiers, men and women alike. And that act is still active today. Albeit when the Japanese Americans fought the war after incarceration, they, at least in 1988, they were repaid. Reparations were paid to them. Executive Order 9066, the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 paid them, I think, 20,000 each.
That wasn't much.
That's a bunch. But then when the Chinese Americans were asked to fight, Roosevelt had to rescind the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 because they were non-citizens, remember? But the Filipinos with the Recession Act is only one of 66 countries that took away benefits from these soldiers.
Yep.
Except in 2009, President Obama passed a law called the Filipino Veterans Equity Compensation Act, which paid about 200 million to veterans who can prove if they served during the war. But this time now, we got about 20,000 left out of the 200,000. But off that, 9,000 who lived in the US got their final pay, which is 15,000. That was to be their last benefit. And those living in the Philippines got their 9,000, right? So if you do the math, you serve in war for 3 or 4 years, were prisoners of war, and then you wait 54, 55 years for your pay with no rate of inflation, they were paid like $60, 60 cents a day, like my dad. My dad was paid his $60, he was supposed to be getting as pay when he was in the US Army then. And then the good graces of the Army took back $38.20. I told you this story, right? You get paid 1946, $60, but we're supposed to owe that you times 36 months that you were in the war, plus that's the prisoner of war, and you're not going to get any more money beyond $60, but I'm going to take away $38.20. And I ask the audience all the time, so how much money did my father got? Less than 22 bucks. But he took the money because there's no other money available to feed his family.
Yep.
That's how the United States Congress then treated these people.
Yep.
So what we want to do is we want to make it right. That law was not discovered until 1974 because a lot of the records were kept in the National Archives and collected dust until we uncovered it in 2012. So our act now, Maki, to answer your question, we've assembled a group middle of last year, lawyers and academics and PR folks, that we want to make it right. So we've been meeting just about every quarter. We have a draft law that basically says we don't want any more money for them because they're aging and they're literally dying. What we want is a memorial fund to do an education program to get this out of secrecy into the public and tell the rest of the world what happened to them. Secondly, to include the women that they excluded from a roster of guerrillas who were under the command of the United States Army at the time. A public apology, much like President Reagan did for the Japanese Americans, and to provide the fact that, and then to recognize a lot of these people who fought under the United States flag to be considered as veterans of our country. That's all we want. Okay, it may not cost them billions of dollars that they want, but we want the veterans or those who fought to be relevant in American history.
Tony, may I join your cause? I want to help.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah, we'll have you.
No, I really do. This is very important. And
Yeah.
I think Asian Hall of Fame with
Right.
our microphone and our platform and social media
Okay.
can really push this to the forefront.
Right.
And also our artist ambassadors are non-Asians, but they're icons of other Hall of Fame programs. They love this kind of cause. And I think
Well, I'll
it's
be
critically
in
important.
Seattle. I know you live in LA. I'll be in Seattle, August, I think, 10th to the 13th.
Oh, wait, I'm
uh,
flying to DC. I'm flying to DC on June the 5th.
June the 5th. Well,
I'll be in
I'll be
DC
here.
for a
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll probably give you more, but for what Tom and I were talking,
For this time, yes.
racial discrimination have existed over time, especially those who serve people of color who have served under the U.S. flag.
Yep.
Literally, and
Yeah.
so
From the
we,
beginning.
Chinese Americans and a lot of the immigrants fought. I mean, there's military records that they have fought under the U.S. flag since 1812. But it's hard to explain to people that if they don't care about history, that Asian Americans have been here for the last 300 years.
Yeah.
Mainly as laborers, slave laborers, farmers,
Yes.
shopkeepers, non-citizens, no recognition whatsoever. And I mean, it's the African Americans as slaves have had it tougher, but it doesn't suggest that Asian Americans suffered as much as they did. But they were not able to be called non-citizens is a tragedy, and to be used that way.
Yeah.
And I think that the Asians in the military, Asian veterans, the Recession Act, Asians who have contributed to the prosperity and security of the United States ought to be recognized. And that's why Asian Hall of Fame exists
Okay.
today.
But I think what you'd be so much more powerful if you combined with African-American celebrities, for instance, right? You have a
Yes.
common cause.
Yes.
When Roosevelt instituted the Social Security system, right, in the 1930s, in order to pass it, he had to get Southern Democrats to come on board, right?
Yep.
So the only way he could get Social Security passed was to exclude domestics, servants, and farmhands, which are at the time mainly Black people and also Asians, right? So they paid into Social Security for 30 years. It was not until the 60s where they started getting benefits, right? So, we could we could do the math and figure out how much you could give free, you could have African Americans not paid income tax for 30 years. I mean, it's only fair, for instance, or the GI Bill after World War II, we had a middle class explosion, white middle class explosion after World War II, because Truman was able to give the veterans a GI Bill for college and a zero interest home loan, right? So now we have these blue collar workers. We were a very stratified society. It was very 1% top, right? Everybody else was blue collar. To go to college for the first time and could buy their first house in the 1940s and 1950s. In the 1980s, those houses are now owned outright, and they pass those houses down. And the average income for an average white family was about 35,000 in the 1980s. When you look at the average black family, was down in the I think it was 9 or 10,000 was the numbers. Completely different. So they had nothing to pass down. So what about all the descendants of those GIs that didn't get the VA home loan and the GI Bill? They should have it, right? Because that's how white middle class exploded. And that's how we dominate the economy right now. But if we buy, especially African-American celebrities who have a lot of hold, right? And a lot of grip on the entertainment industry, which is good, you should combine with them and then bring both causes up. It's much more powerful, I believe.
Yeah.
100%.
Collaborate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Collaborate. Yeah. Across the color line. 100%.
Yeah.
Thank
That's
you,
what we're
Tony.
trying to
Thank
do.
you, Tom. Well, the thing is, that's why I love talking to you, because now I know we're way over time and I have to stop the recording, but I did want to just express my gratitude, not only of our mutual work, but our friendship. And I know that there's more to come.